Hello, hello, and welcome to another exciting episode of Skeptics and Seekers Sunday Sermon. This is the Jordan Peterson video that everyone is talking about. I will be doing this in 4 parts. Hopefully, no one part will last too very long. And I don't know the release schedule. It will be at least once a day. I will be traveling Tuesday through Friday, and so I won't be able to do anything during those days. But I might get a couple done today, and maybe a couple done tomorrow. We'll see. This is part 1 of the recording.
Jordan Peterson recently debated 20 atheists on the YouTube program Jubilee.
If there is a God, what is the purpose of life?
So do you believe in the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good notion of God?
You're really quite something, you are.
Aren't I? But you're really quite nothing. Right, you're not a Christian.
Okay, I'm done with him.
Dr. Peterson sits in the middle of 20 atheists in chairs circling him who rush to a chair to debate him over one of Peterson's claims. I can't think of anyone more qualified or interesting to give his response than our guest today, Dr. William Lane Craig, who has arguably debated the leading atheists over the past few decades. My team and I have pulled together a few clips for Dr. Craig to give us his responses to. Now, Dr. Craig has not seen the entire debate and is reacting to these isolated clips. So please go back and watch the debate in its entirety for context analysis and comparison. Dr. Craig, this is a ton of fun. I am personally looking forward to your thoughts. Thanks for doing this.
I am glad to do this. I think this is a remarkable format that Jubilee has put together. It is so entertaining and at the same time really informative. So I think it's a wonderful event, and I'm glad to have a chance to comment.
Well, let's jump in at the first clip and then get your take.
My first claim, atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting.
Let me say 2 things about this.
Before you do, Dr. Craig, let me say at least this thing about this. The claim is argumentative, ill-formed, philosophically absurd, theologically incorrect in all its ways. It's not an honest attempt at conversation. It is the kind of claim that people make when they don't want an honest attempt at conversation. And I frankly recommend, although I do not always do it for the sake of content, I firmly recommend that if anyone begins a conversation that way or puts out a claim like that, you should simply walk away. Or get into a shouting match, because that's where it's going to end. So let's look at the claim, atheists reject God. Well, first of all, we don't believe in your God. It's not like your God has made some kind of proposition to follow him, and we've rejected the proposition. We don't believe your God exists. But the idea that we don't understand what we're rejecting is kind of ad hominem. It's absurd in all of its forms, and I've listened to people try to rehabilitate this claim, but it simply falls apart at every level. Take me, for example. I have heard Dr. Peterson's formation of his God. To the extent that anyone can understand it, I'm pretty sure I understand it. I reject it. Therefore, I understand what I have rejected. I have listened to Dr. Craig for decades. I understand his God very well. I have listened to Sean McDowell. I understand his God very well. I reject those gods. I have been a leader in 3 different denominations, not just one. From conservative to liberal. I understand those God formations. I reject them. I have studied religions and denominations and all manner of God concepts. I reject those. I have rejected every God I have understood. I have not rejected any God I do not understand, because I would not know how to reject such a thing. If your concept of God is that God is a can of Diet Coke, I accept that God concept because I believe that Diet Coke exists. Now, why you're calling it God, I have no idea. But I wouldn't reject that proposition if what you're saying is you define God as Diet Coke. Cool. So, the other thing that we have to consider is that if atheists are rejecting gods that they do not understand, then the Christian has to take the blame for that. Because it's your God or gods we've been rejecting. You preach, we listen, we read your material, we reject it. Pure and simple. So you can say that we reject your God. Cool. But you can't say that we're rejecting that which we don't understand. There are lots of God concepts. Like I said, this is a no true Scotsman kind of argument. So it's fallacious on its face. Oh yeah, you may have rejected that God you understand, but you don't understand the true God. And who holds the definition of the true God in their hands? Well, in this case, whoever's making the argument, Jordan Peterson has a very specific formulation of God that he thinks atheists have rejected because they don't understand it. Well, Jordan, that may be on you, after all your years of communicating, that people don't understand your God. But what they have understood, they've rejected. And so, by definition, they have rejected what they have understood. Okay? There's more to be said about that. Let's see where this goes.
First, Sean, I think that the claim is very plausibly true. I think that...
Which makes me wonder about how good of a philosopher Dr. Craig is. There's no way that this can be very plausibly true.
Atheists generally don't have the concept of God as a maximally great being, a being that is necessary, self-existent, eternal, spaceless, immaterial, perfectly good. They do not generally have this sort of majestic, philosophically rich concept of God.
Okay. I think we can throw out the term majestic. That's a kind of a devotion. It's devotional language. So your opinion that your God is majestic, I don't think so. Philosophically rich. Well, most people don't have terminal degrees in philosophy. So that may be true. But then again, how philosophically rich of a definition, of a description of God must a person have before they know God? This is a very elitist position that Dr. Craig is presenting, and I have complained about this position from the beginning. This is one of the reasons I am so opposed to most forms of academic Christianity. Ivory Tower Christianity does not touch the ground where people actually are. The boots on the ground Christianity does not recognize Dr. Craig's ivory tower God, because most people do not have a philosophically rich concept of God. And so what he's doing as he describes his particular idea of God is eliminating people with every additional description to say that if you don't have this concept of God, then you don't know who God is. That has other consequences. We'll get there.
The philosopher David Hunt once remarked to me that he thinks that God is a lot more like Plotinus I than like Zeus.
Take a moment and look at your screen, if this is playing on a screen that you can easily glance at. Look at Sean McDowell's face. Tell me if it doesn't look like he's thinking to himself, who the hell is Plotinus I?
And I think for many atheists, God is more like Zeus than he is like Plotinus I. And I would say, Sean, frankly, that this is a case for Christians as well.
Uh-oh. Here we go.
That most Christians do not have a very full-orbed, philosophically deep concept of God. Most Christians do not have.
Hang on.
Christians as well. That most Christians.
Did he say most Christians? I'm thinking I heard most Christians do not have this idea of God either. Most Christians, not some Christians. This becomes a real problem if what he's saying is true.
This is a case for Christians as well. That most Christians do not have a very full-orbed, philosophically deep concept of God. So if Christians don't even understand what God is like, how much more is that true for the average non-believer?
Okay. So basically, if you don't have Dr. Craig's philosophically rich, majestic and philosophically rich concept of God, then you don't know God. And he's saying that atheists don't know God. They don't know what they're rejecting. They don't know the real God. But if most Christians are in the same boat, then most Christians also don't know the real God. So they don't know what they're accepting. Let me put it this way. Let's try an analogy here. Let's say that me and Brian Y. were doing a show together. We didn't do any formal introductions, didn't give any names, and people listening to the show, they mistook Brian Y. as David. They hear his voice and what he's saying. He's saying, "Oh, David, yeah, that's him," and they mistake me for Brian Y. And they say, "Yeah, I'm not real big on that Brian guy. That David is a sharp cookie. I really agree with the things that he says." Okay, are they really siding with me? No, they've mistaken me. They don't know me. They have misidentified me. What they really mean is Brian Y. They're a fan of Brian Y. So, it cannot be said that they accept me and the things that I'm saying if they've mistaken me for Brian. If you see what I'm getting at there. And the same is true for Christians. If they have a false idea of God in a way that would mean they don't understand what they have accepted, and this is Craig's claim, because he believes it is true that atheists don't understand what they've rejected. And so in the same way, if Christians don't understand what they've accepted, then they are probably not worshiping the right God either. They have accepted the wrong God. This is an inescapable consequence of this argument. Sean is not going to be very comfortable with this.
Now, the second thing, though, that I'd like to comment on this is that this claim, whether true or false, is just irrelevant to the truth of Christian theism. The issues that Jordan Peterson has chosen to talk about are sociological, historical claims that you could go either way with. The Christian faith, if true, doesn't imply either the affirmative or the negative answer to these questions. So in that sense, I don't think these are really the important questions that he's raising. These are tangential questions because they're ultimately irrelevant to the truth of Christian theism. There's no discussion in this exchange about arguments for God's existence, no discussion of evidence for the reliability of the Gospels and Jesus. Instead, we get these socio-historical sorts of questions, which isn't surprising because Dr. Peterson is a psychiatrist after all. And so he's sticking to his area of expertise.
Okay. Again, I don't know how Craig got there. This is a Christian versus 20 atheists. By definition, it's theological. So if he is a theological lightweight, then Dr. Peterson is not sticking to his expertise. He's talking theology. So I think the very opposite thing is true. Jubilee got the wrong guy for this if they wanted someone to be talking about Christianity in a situation where Christianity was their wheelhouse. Dr. Peterson is speaking well outside of his wheelhouse. And so Dr. Craig, I don't quite understand how he's saying and that it's good that Peterson is sticking to his area of expertise.
But while that's a good thing for him to do, unfortunately, it leaves us really deficient in terms of arguments and evidence for and against the truth of Christianity.
I think both those points are really helpful. And I appreciate that you said it's plausibly true and generally true. Could we really know that this is absolutely true? In my experience, I would just say it's often right. In my interaction, not always. Many times I'll ask atheists, and by the way, Christians, but in particular atheists, can you tell me about the God you don't believe in? And as I listen more and more, there's a caricature or a depiction of God that I would argue doesn't line up with the scriptures.
Okay. So if that's true for Christians, then they're not Christians. They're atheists because they don't actually believe in your God. But again, it becomes a no true Scotsman's kind of thing, where Sean becomes the arbiter of the real description of the real God, and as he interrogates atheists about the gods they reject, he thinks, okay, so there's something that's not scripturally sound about God, so you just have the wrong God. If Dr. Craig is correct, that's true about Christians as well. That's true about everybody. You've just got the wrong God. This is one of the necessary consequences when you turn yourself into the arbiter of the true God description, and you become the judge over other people's idea of God.
Now, part of Peterson's argument is he points back towards in the Old Testament, and Moses has this view through the cleft of God, just to point out that kind of as finite beings, we only have a glimpse of the infinite. And there's truth in that. But obviously, if we have a glimpse of God, that's enough for a believer like Moses to believe. But that's also enough for somebody to reject God in principle and have a sufficient knowledge of who God is.
Thank you, Sean. This was my thought as I listened to this the first time through. And Peterson makes this example about Moses only being able to see the backside of God. And what Peterson actually says is that means that in some ways God is utterly unknowable. Okay, but that's a very self-defeating argument, isn't it? Because if God is unknowable, then you don't know him either. No one can know him, so no one can accept what they understand any more than, I'm saying this all bad. If atheists are rejecting what they don't understand, then Christians have to be accepting what they don't understand because God is utterly unknowable. And so that's a problem, and Sean recognizes that. And so he says, kind of an attempt to salvage this, well, you can't know everything about God. Well, okay, you can't know everything about me either. That's irrelevant. What Sean does say, though, is that Moses knew enough about God to know what he needed to know. Christians can know enough about God to know what they need to know to accept him, and therefore, logically, atheists can also know enough about God to know what they're rejecting, which utterly repudiates the claim that we're addressing.
And I think Romans makes this clear when it talks about the wrath of God being revealed against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, for what can be known about God is plain to them. And then verse 21, for although they knew God. So I think his point in part is that we don't have exhaustive knowledge of God. And I say, of course, but we have sufficient knowledge of God to believe and to reject. I think that's the key point that's a takeaway here.
Okay. So if I chop this up, which I may not right now, I'm going to go ahead and say that this is part 2. If I don't chop it up, then you can ignore these particular sections. But yes, I just want to go back to Sean again. He makes a basic point that I've seen a lot of people make online, or at least a few people, Christians, that if Romans 1 is correct, and you know how I feel about Romans 1, and we know how Christians feel about Romans 1. If Romans 1 is correct, the proposition is not only philosophically unsound, it's theologically unsound. Atheists have to know exactly who they're rejecting. And if they don't, Romans 1 is a lie. So it just makes me, again, go back and wonder, where is William Lane Craig's head? Where he says it's very plausibly true, when, as near as I can tell, there's no realm of intellectual inquiry where it could be true. Part 2.
Social animals, which we are, right, require some level of morality or...
Into what? I'm not disagreeing.
Sure.
Why do they require that?
Because it's the only way that social groups can actually survive, right?
That's my point with regards to science. Thank you very much.
Is that?
Precisely the point that you just made, that science has to exist within a moral framework that isn't in itself scientific.
How's that not scientific?
Well, because it's not derived from the scientific process, as you just indicated.
It doesn't need to derive from the scientific process. It's the fact that we are social animals, and we need that to exist as a group.
I agree, but you pointed to the morality of Neanderthals, to the morality of chimpanzees. They didn't derive that from science.
They don't need to. That's not how that works.
That's my point.
Science explains it.
So no, science doesn't explain morality.
It doesn't explain how social animals would need to be.
Well, that's a complicated question.
But we see it, though.
Yeah, but explaining the evolution of morality and explaining morality itself aren't the same thing.
Dr. Craig, this clip is rooted in Peterson's second prompt, namely that morality and purpose cannot be found within science.
Okay. I hear this a lot. I'm going to try to speak less about this one, and I might fail, but when I'm done with this video, I will officially turn my attention to the Summer of Morality, where it will be the moral argument and moral issues all summer long. All summer long, with very few variations. Honestly, I might challenge myself and do a year of morality in a year or two. We'll have to see where that goes, but you could easily do it, I think. So I have a lot to say about this, obviously, but I also don't want to make this a 3-hour long video. So let's just go back and listen to the claim one more time.
Namely that morality and purpose cannot be found within science.
Okay. Morality and purpose cannot be found within science. Okay, that's trivially true, but that's because you don't understand what science is. When Christians make this claim, you have to ask yourself, what do they think science is? Because it's not what you think science is. It's not what science actually is. So they speak of science as if to personify it somehow. It's either a person that does things, or it's an object that contains things. In this case, science is being objectified like a box, and you open the box and you look around and you don't see this object called morality or this other object called purpose. You see, science doesn't contain morality or purpose. And that would make sense if science was an object like a box that contained things like morality and purpose. But since we know that that is not the case, then we have to wonder what Peterson and, at the moment, Sean, and it will also be William Lane Craig, what they're on about. Are they purposely, and I'll leave this to you to decide, misrepresenting what science is? Do you think they really don't know what science is? Or do you think they might be engaging in a bit of deception, a bit of sophistry? And I would prefer it be sophistry, because sophistry doesn't have to be dishonest. But in this case, they're being dishonest or misrepresenting what science is, and they're talking to a population that I think largely doesn't know what science is. And so they think these people, well, they're smart, they know what they're talking about, so they just accept the framing. No one who engages in this conversation should ever accept the framing of a Christian when they bring up science. They are simply wrong. Science does not. Whenever a sentence starts like that for a Christian, something wrong is about to come out of their mouth. All right, and in this case, science does not contain morality or purpose is, like I said, trivially true, but only because it is a lie that that science could contain anything like that. Science is not a container of things, and you're just getting it all muddled. So what is science? Science is a method. It's just a method. It's a name we give to a collection of methods that we've codified and badged as the scientific method. That's all science is. When someone is doing science, they are following the steps, the individual constituent parts of a methodology in the hopes of getting a better answer about the nature of reality. That's what they're doing. Okay, and the reason we had to have a methodology is because once upon a time when there was no methodology, people would just go with what they felt. You know, if you were rich and you said something, well, people would just believe that. Or if you're famous and said something, people would believe that. Even if you were lying and said something, people would believe that. If you were sincerely convinced of a thing, you had a vision, you had an experience, and you said something, well, people would believe that. And as we know, that doesn't lead to any consistent and very seldom accurate understanding about reality. And so we had to start saying, well, maybe we shouldn't just trust people when they say something. Maybe it's important to observe something before we talk about it, rather than just pontificate. So people who observe things, that we can begin to have a dialogue with about the nature of reality, okay? So that's a part of the scientific method. What else, though? Well, maybe if this thing is repeatable, if someone else can observe it too, for instance. So every time someone says, "Hey, Joe, come over here. Something I need you to look at," they're engaging in science. That's actually also a part of the method, that it's not just you observing, that someone else can observe it and feedback that they see what you're seeing. So that's kind of a repeatability idea. It's important that you write down how you got from idea to proof of a claim, so that someone else can see all of the processes, see if there were any errors, repeat the same experiments in their lab, so that we can remove some of the guesswork out of it. Okay, that's science. We have been doing all of these things from the beginning, just not consistently. But as we try harder and harder to get better answers that have less personal opinion, less personal bias, then we look at the things that work to get better answers, and we just kind of put them together, and we've labeled it science. Okay, that's all that is. And you could even argue that the scientific method was produced by the scientific method, because it's always been there. We did not invent the scientific method. We merely discovered it and recognized that there are better ways of coming to truth than others. You put those together, we call it science. Science does not contain anything because it's not a container. Now, if what you're trying to say is that you cannot derive true ideas about things like morality from using the scientific method, then I think you're out to lunch. And one of the reasons that you don't hear Christians, my opinion, you don't hear Christians making that formulation, is because that would be a correct formulation and they would be obviously wrong. And so they have to talk about science. They have to categorize science as something that it is not, so that they can make this false claim to begin with.
What do you make of this contention and this interaction?
Again, I think that the contention is obviously true. Science doesn't explore ethics.
Okay, once again, what is science? Remember the rule I gave earlier. When a Christian says science does or science doesn't, something wrong is going to follow. Now they're talking about science as a personification. Science doesn't explore questions of morality and ethics. Well, Bill, science doesn't explore anything. Science is not Jacques Cousteau. Jacques Cousteau used science to come up with better ideas about reality. But science doesn't explore anything. Science doesn't explore the natural world. It is a set of methodologies to help people who would like to explore things do better. Now, if you're saying that science cannot be used in the exploration of morality to come up with better answers, and once again, you're completely out to lunch, and we began to recognize why Christians do not speak of it accurately, why they have to kind of straw man the idea of science, and treat it as if it does things and does not things, so that they can say that science does not explore morality. Science doesn't explore anything, but you can definitely use good methodology to come up with better ideas about morality.
That's a totally different discipline than the exploration of the natural physical world.
Okay, there's the move. This is Jordan Peterson's move too, but anyone who's kind of speaking Christianly, this is the move. It is very clear that what I'm saying about science and morality is true. Christians know that. They don't want to have that conversation. And so how do you push science away from things that they want to talk about absent science? They just push their thing to another realm. They move the goalpost out of the stadium and someplace else. In this case, sure, science gives you all the explanations you want of the natural world. But now he's making this claim that morality is in the not so natural world. It's in this other realm that no one can explore because no one can prove it exists. It's this other thing that science can't touch. And once again, Christians kind of have to have this speculation in order for any of their ideas to hold up. So they have to strawman what science is. And then when it gets too uncomfortable, they just have to move their thing out of this world into another realm, into another place. Away goes the goalposts. And then they can say, okay, this is safe from the scrutiny of scientists, of people who are doing natural experiments to find out what works better and what doesn't. We can remove it from this methodology of epistemology that has proven successful. We can remove it from that realm, remove it to fairyland, and then we can use our fairyland tools to talk about morality.
So what he's saying is obviously true, I think, and most ethicists would concur. Unfortunately, I don't think he does a very good job of defending his thesis against the challenges of his interlocutor. What the challenger wants to say is that in virtue of our being social animals, there has evolved a kind of herd morality among Homo sapiens, which is useful in the perpetuation of our species. And so it gets selected for by biological evolution. And you
therefore morality.
See similar patterns of cooperation among other social animals like pigs and elephants, for example.
Therefore morality.
And Peterson does make the claim, which is correct, that explaining how moral beliefs evolve is not the same as explaining the moral beliefs. What the student...
I'm sorry. What does that mean? Explaining how moral beliefs evolved, which was the kind of the question and the point, does not explain the moral beliefs. Before we move forward, can anyone figure out what he's talking about here?
Tries to explain is how the moral beliefs. What the student tries to explain is how do we come to have the moral beliefs that we do? And he wants to appeal to this socializing effect. But even if that...
Right. How do we come to have these moral beliefs? He appeals to socializing effects. Therefore, question answered.
Appeal to this socializing effect. But even if that were true, that doesn't provide a foundation for the objectivity of moral values and duties.
You haven't proven the objectivity of moral values and duties exist. Why would he try to provide a foundation for something that does not exist? So this is part of that Christian maneuver. We're talking about morality. The person gives a good enough explanation of morality and how we get it. And the move is, yeah, but you're just, the truth about morality is over in this other sphere, not in the natural world. And I'm going to question beg and say it's objective in that you have not proven the objective foundations of morality. You have not explained how they have come to exist. And so therefore you've moved the definition of morality again out of the realm of intelligibility into this kind of spiritual, otherworldly realm where no natural explanations can touch your presuppositional spiritual beliefs.
To do that, you need to go outside the natural realm.
There we go. Can't explain it in this world. Got to go into fairyland.
Otherwise, all you're left with is no normativity. You're simply left with these ingrained patterns of.
Okay, we don't have normativity. I just want to, I'm going to do a lot of moral argument. I promise, and I'm trying very hard to let some of this go, but I can't let all of this go. There is no normativity. There's William Lane Craig has this kind of existential crisis, this fear that there can be no morality unless everyone has the same idea of what is right and wrong. Otherwise, people can just make up their idea of what's right and wrong, and the world would devolve into chaos. Well, even among Christians, you don't have a normative idea of moral values, or even what creates or undergirds moral values. You think that you do, but you're wrong about that. And so this idea of normativity and objectivity have actually nothing to do with questions of morality and ethics. This is an entirely different question, and it's why I call the moral argument an argument completely devoid of morality. It's not about morality at all.
Behavior that otherwise all you're left with is no normativity. You're simply left with these ingrained patterns of behavior that could have been quite different if you rewound the film of biological evolution and shot it anew. A very different type of creature might have evolved with a very different set of values. So,
right. Perhaps it would have been a creature that was more moral than the average human is today.
I think the two here are talking at cross purposes with each other, and I wish that Peterson could have been.
That often happens when one is grounded in reality and the other is grounded in fairyland.
Clearer in articulating and defending his view.
Again, that's helpful. Peterson goes on to describe how it's not in science, but kind of in the religious realm, so to speak, that we need to ground morality.
Right. Again, cool story, bro. You're bringing a lot of things into that have nothing to do with the true discussion of morality here. But now, again, Sean is joining in with we got to get the goalpost out of this world, because if you do, you can kick the field goal and score. We got to get rid of the goalpost. We got to move it to the next dimension, into the religious, spiritual dimension. And spiritual is that which no Christian can define. That's what that ends up being. I just want to go back to a thing we were talking about just a moment ago, about how morality could be different. That's not a possibility. That's the reality that we see now. Look at the various social species that this planet has produced. Every last one of them has a different code of ethics and behavior that would be considered moral. They have evolved different moral values, every one of the social species, including humans. And we don't even have to go outside of humans to recognize that in different regions of the world, that we have developed different ethics, different moral values all over the world, from one human to another. Look at people who differ in things like intelligence and education. You often have a very different kind of set of moral values from one end of the spectrum to another. Okay? So we have, in fact, evolved differently. So we don't have to play the game of, if you rewind it and you play it through again, we might evolve different moral values. The Christian says this, by the way, as if the only possibility is that we would evolve worse moral values. They never consider the possibility that we might evolve better moral values, and without religion, we might evolve better moral values faster. They never actually consider that possibility. So, yeah, this is an existential fear of Craig and of many Christians, and so they have to feel like there is some overarching single right answer for how we live our lives and what we do. And if there isn't, then it's chaos. And they fear the chaos. I firmly believe this is kind of the foundation of this moral argument crisis that the Christian wants to bring up. Why they feel like it's necessary to have some kind of singular objectivity when it comes to moral ideas. And yet nature, while it has produced what we would consider morality, has not actually come close to producing objectivity.
But I think his point here is that science cannot explain morality, but assumes morality. In itself, that's an interesting point.
Okay. This point that Sean is making, this is his worst moment in the video. He has a lot of good moments in this video. This is the worst of them, though. Science does not assume morality. Let's follow this.
That science cannot provide a justification for objective moral values and duties, but assumes it. I mean, to be specific, much of the scientific project relies upon trusting the testimony of others.
Okay. Yeah, Sean, I'm going to try to be generous here because you've done a pretty good job with the rest of this video. I've seen the whole thing. But you leave the door open for the possibility that you just don't understand what science is. I don't believe that. I don't think you're a stupid man, and I don't think you're particularly dishonest, okay? But what you're saying here is the exact opposite of the truth. Science does not the scientific method does not depend on users of that method being honest. All right, scientists don't trust other scientists in the least bit. And in fact, you could say they're among the least trusting paranoid people in the universe because everybody's trying to, in some ways, come up with the same, with a solution to the same problem, and they want their solution to be right, not someone else's. And so when someone beats them to a solution, they're not embracing it. They're not saying, yay, they got there, give the Nobel Prize money to that guy. They're saying, nope, fool, I want to prove you wrong. That is the mindset of most people who do real science that I have personally known. So you're absolutely wrong about that. But more than that, the scientific method itself, part of what it is designed to do, is to steer you away from trusting testimony. It's so that you don't have to trust the person making a claim, not that you have to trust the person making the claim. That's why the elements of the method are there. If someone is lying about a claim, we can find out real fast with the scientific method. That's what it's there to root out. And when Sean says, no, it's subject to trusting the word of people, and therefore it requires objective morality, I don't know where his head is. There is zero possibility that can be true in any way. It is the exact diametric opposite of what science is and does.
Who we project relies upon trusting the testimony of others who we assume will document and report their findings accurately.
Right.
Bill
says, right. So Bill has also raised his hand and said, yeah, I don't understand science either.
Into the scientific endeavor is that we have moral obligations such as truth-telling. Therefore, science cannot explain its existence.
No. Science doesn't care about truth-telling. It really doesn't. There have been many charlatans. There are many charlatans out there now. Just watch the internet. They pop up. But actual scientists using good methodology can sort them out pretty quickly. We don't need to trust anything. He's mistaken science for religion. Religion needs that. Science is built to work despite dishonesty from some scientists. The whole point of the method is to move away from the claim to get to the proof.
It assumes it. And I would argue, and I know you would too separately, that there's a bunch of other assumptions that science begins with that are more at home in a theistic worldview than in a naturalistic.
Right. So Sean, what Sean is really talking about is a theistic worldview. And somehow he thinks that science works the same way. And it just doesn't. Am I wrong? I'm not wrong, but I would love for someone to challenge me on this. That would be so much fun.
Worldview. Now, in fairness, of course, some atheists would point towards justification for morality outside of science, but that goes beyond Peterson's case here.
Okay, if there is a God, what is the purpose of life?
All right. Peterson also talked about purpose in this, and so this would still be part 2. That purpose can't be found within science, and so we're just kind of picking up there.
Well, in the Christian tradition, the purpose of life is to engage in voluntary, upward, self-sacrifice.
Okay. 3 terms there: voluntary, upward, self-sacrifice. I know what voluntary means. I know what upward means. I know what self-sacrifice means. I don't know what these things mean together. I have no idea what that means. I don't even have any guesses. Let's just take the last 2 words: upward, self-sacrifice. What's that? What does that mean as opposed to downward self-sacrifice? What are we talking about here? Voluntary self-sacrifice. Can self-sacrifice be considered self-sacrifice if it wasn't voluntary? Is there forced self-sacrifice? It's absurd. There is no such thing as forced self-sacrifice. If you were forced to die, you didn't do a self-sacrifice, you were murdered. So I have no idea what he's talking about as he's describing purpose in the Christian tradition. This is nonsense.
So that the kingdom of heaven can be established on earth.
Okay. That one too. The kingdom of heaven be established on earth. If we don't engage in this voluntary upward self-sacrifice, does that mean the kingdom of heaven will not be established on earth? Does that mean that we control whether the kingdom of heaven is established on earth? And if so, does that mean I can stop it? Is that why we don't have it established on earth? Is it me? Did I win?
Well, is Jordan Peterson right that in the Christian tradition, the purpose of life is voluntary upward self-sacrifice so the kingdom of heaven can be established on earth?
Well, that's not the way I understand it, Sean. I think the Westminster Catechism has best expressed what the purpose of life is.
Oh, boy. More of the academia. It's interesting that he goes to the Westminster Catechism to explain the purpose of life instead of Ecclesiastes.
And that is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. Our end is to be found in fellowship with God, in an eternal love relationship with Him. And
Okay, so there's a bit of a competition going on between Jordan Peterson and William Lane Craig. Which one has the least appealing idea of human purpose? For Jordan Peterson, it's that we all sacrifice ourselves. Man, that can't be right. To bring about the kingdom of heaven, mind you, the kingdom of heaven doesn't come about if we don't all voluntarily self-sacrifice. So that's one idea of purpose. For William Lane Craig, the purpose of our existence is to give the glory monster God more glory. That which one is more ignoble?
this is the fulfillment of human being.
That's well said. I think as I wrestled with his explanation, I think he's partly right. You know, when Jesus is asked the greatest commandment, he says, love God and love others. Like you said, fellowship, relationship. You know, in John 17:4, he says, and this is eternal life, that they know you, the one true God. You could argue that God put Adam and Eve in the garden to care for it so he might dwell among them.
Never understood that argument at all. If God really wanted to dwell among humans, he would have made them in heaven. We'd be there now. We'd be dwelling among him. He would be dwelling among us right now. If that was his goal, boy, he had a funny way of showing it,
so to speak. Abraham is called up to, go start leading the people of Israel out. Ultimately, they end up in the land, and in the Exodus with Moses, we're told in Exodus 29:45, so that he may dwell among the people of Israel and will be their God. I think
Isn't God omnipresent? Couldn't he have dwelled among the people of Israel regardless of where they were?
The new heavens and new earth is that we would dwell with God in relationship. So how we get there might be through self-sacrifice. That might be the means, but the purpose of life, I think, like you said, in the classical Christian tradition, is to know God and know others and to bring glory to God.
Okay, how we get to this kingdom of heaven is through self-sacrifice. Huh. So, it's one thing to say that we have to die because all humans die. Although I'm not sure why we would need to die to bring the kingdom of heaven on earth. But the idea that the only way to get there would be to self-sacrifice, and I don't know what kind of fantasy that entails. What are they talking about? Self-sacrifice. You got to do something to kill yourself. You got to be a martyr. What does it mean? That you never enjoy any of the good things that life has to offer. What do they mean by self-sacrifice? And that somehow the only way to get to the good place is you got to commit harikari. So that's door number one. I think I'd like door number two, please.
Through doing so.
I think what Peterson does is make a fundamental confusion that is so common between being and doing. So many people think that the Christian life is about doing. What do we do for God? What are my duties to perform? What do I have to do? Where the Christian life is fundamentally, really, as you just said, it's about being. It's about being in relationship with God, the source of all goodness and love.
Well, unless you listen to Jesus, the kingdom of heaven is about doing good things.
So do you believe in the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good notion of God?
What do you mean by believe?
Do you think it to be true?
That's the circular definition. What do you mean
How
when
is
you
that
say you
circular?
believe?
How is that circular?
Because you added no content to the answer by substituting the word true and believe.
I said you think it to be true.
All right. So if
What's
you
a
believe
belief?
something, you stake your life on it.
What do you mean by that?
You live for it and you die for it. That's what I mean by that. It isn't something that you say. It isn't something that's associated with logical consistency. It's not declarative. It's not propositional. It's not a figment of your imagination. It's the presupposition of your attention and your action. And you're either fragmented, in which case you worship multiple gods, or there's some unity at the bottom of it that makes you an unstoppable force.
Bill, given that you've written extensively on what faith and belief in God means, in your volume 1 on systematic philosophical theology, I've been really eager for your take on his description of belief in God.
This is exactly what came to my mind, Sean.
Okay. Sorry. So I wanted you to hear that whole definition unbroken. This little aside about belief. This is a tactic of Jordan Peterson. If you watch enough Jordan Peterson, you will see this when he gets backed into a corner, when he gets caught out with some ridiculous thing that he says. He goes back to the trope of redefining things in a way that the average person doesn't understand that thing to mean, and so he can kind of place himself on a higher plane, more knowledgeable, more intelligent. You see, you're playing with the word down there the way common people use it, but you see, I'm playing 4D chess up here, so you don't really understand belief. You don't really understand this word that you think that you've caught me out on. You just move the goalpost a little bit to the left, and you get there. So, what do you mean by believe? He asks. You think it to be true. Okay, sounds good. He says, well, that's circular. Well, that's wrong. You philosophers out there, that's not circular at all. He's simply trying to get out of it by accusing the person of a fallacy that he's not committing, or to accuse the person that they don't understand the word correctly, which he does. Eventually, Jordan has to back out of that, though, and now he has to give an explanation of belief. What do you mean by believe? How do you define it? So Jordan Peterson begins with something that I find utterly insane. I was somewhat gobsmacked by this the first time I heard it, and so I'm gonna just get there again. All right.
And love.
So do you believe in the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good notion of God?
Now, you notice this question here. Do you believe in the all-good, all-powerful notion of God? Jordan Peterson never answers it. And the reason we go down this rabbit hole is because Jordan Peterson doesn't want to answer the question. This is, again, a tactic. So people probably forgot that this question was even asked because Jordan Peterson just answers the question with a question and just keeps doing that until the original question has been lost.
What do you mean by believe?
Do you think it to be true?
That's the circular definition. What do you mean
How
when
is
you
that
say you
circular?
believe?
How is that circular?
Because you added no content to the answer by substituting the word true.
You can just see Peterson's wheels spinning, and he's thinking to himself, have I gotten out of this yet? Am I out of this question about believing in God?
And believe.
I said, you think it to be true.
All right. So if
What's
you
a
believe
belief?
something, you stake your life on it.
What do you mean by that?
Right. Good question. What does it mean to stake your life on something if you believe something? I believe that the microphone I'm speaking into right now was produced by a company called 512 Audio, and it is called the Skylight. I'm not going to stake my life on it. What would it mean for me to stake my life on it? I have no idea. And neither does Jordan Peterson.
You live for it?
I'm not living for the fact that this microphone is called the Skylight made by 512 Audio. What does it mean that I would live for it? Does this mean anything? What do you mean by that?
And you die for it.
Well, hang on. Now I've got to die? I mean, you're obsessed with self-sacrifice. I'm not sacrificing myself over this. You got to die for it? The thing that makes this so absurd, and you'll notice on the video, I've got it freeze-framed on Jordan Peterson's face as he is still trying to work himself out of this jam. You can see he is very much alive. He is very much alive as he says that you've got to die for it. Everyone in the room who believes things, they are very much alive. All of the audience outside of the room is very much alive. Every Christian who patted Jordan Peterson on the back for his evasion is very much alive, so they haven't died for anything. They have not died for anything. The definition of belief cannot, by definition, mean that you die for it because they haven't died for anything. Because they're alive. So, and I know that some of you might be thinking, oh, you're being pedantic. All he means is that you've got to be willing to die for it. But what does that mean? What does it mean to be willing to die for it? I can say I'm willing to die for anything. I'm willing to die for this microphone. I guarantee you I'm not, though. So you can't actually prove that you're willing to die unless you die. There's only one proof, only one evidence. You got to die. At the very least, you've got to be in a situation where dying is a distinct possibility. Jordan Peterson it is not a distinct possibility that he's going to die for his beliefs. In fact, it's worse than that. The vast majority of people who have ever lived and died did not die for a belief. They just died. They died because of a brain tumor. They died because of lung cancer. They died because they were 97 years old. They died because they stepped in front of a bus. They died because they got shot with a stray bullet. They died because this ecosystem is really good at killing things off. That's why they died. They didn't die for anything. Now, they may have held some beliefs when they died, but they weren't a martyr by any definition. And so to suggest that you cannot believe something unless you are martyred for it is utterly insane.
That's what I mean by that. It isn't something that you say. It isn't something that's associated with logical consistency.
That's good, because nothing you've said so far is associated with logical consistency.
It's not declarative. It's not propositional. It's not a figment of your imagination. It's the presupposition of your attention and your action.
Okay. The presupposition of your attention and your action. One gets the feeling that Peterson has moved away from what does it mean to believe a proposition to some other question. Because he's not answering that question. He's moved on from that question because he was asked if you believe in God. Okay? He doesn't want anything to do with that question. So he's talking about something else. Can we figure out what he's talking about? That it's the presupposition of your life and your action. I believe a lot of things, most of which have no connection with any presupposition to my life and actions. So he can't be talking about simple belief anymore. He's talking about some kind of ultimate belief in some ultimate thing. He's changed the subject, but he did not do us the courtesy of announcing what that subject was.
You're either fragmented, in which case you worship multiple gods, or there's some unity at the bottom of it that makes you an unstoppable force.
So wait a minute. If you don't have this singular presupposition of your life, then you're fragmented. Does that mean you don't believe in anything, or does that mean you believe in everything? His thought process is fragmented. And the only reason we get there, bear in mind, is because he got a question that he didn't want to answer.
Bill, given that you've written extensively on what faith and belief in God means, in your volume 1 on systematic philosophical theology, I've been really eager for your take on his description of belief in God.
This is exactly what came to my mind, Sean. He is describing as belief, acting as if your life depended on it. And this is consistent with pretending. You make believe that it's true. You act as if it were true. And that isn't what belief really is. I think, contrary to what Peterson just said, the belief does involve propositional truth. It is saying that it is true that God exists. And therefore, belief in the Christian sense does definitely involve commitment to propositional truths, not just acting as if your life depended on something.
One of my concerns is that he seems to imply that belief is absolute, all or nothing. And it seems to me that belief can come in degrees. We can have greater and lesser confidence that something is true, maybe experience, maybe evidence, testimony from somebody else. And I think the definition concerns me because it sets such a high standard for Christians who think, gosh, I believe this, but have I really staked everything on it? Would I die for this? You know, maybe they have questions and doubts, think I'm not a believer, or an unbeliever looking in going, well, I'm inclined towards this being true, but I'm not at that full scale level that he has. I appreciate that he's emphasizing the side of belief that means to stake your life on it, but it just concerns me that maybe that's what being belief is reduced down to at the expense of, like you said, propositional belief and the graded nature of belief.
Okay. That was a good response from Sean. I would just like to add that Peterson, there are places he can go in the world and say the types of things he says and become very much unalive. So if he's anxious to die for his beliefs, he's in the wrong place. He's not going to die for his beliefs here. William Lane Craig, there are places he can go and do his evangelism where he would become quickly unalived. If belief was something to die for, belief in God was, you had to be martyred for it, it's easy to do that. In today's world, it's easy to be martyred. It's hard to be martyred for your faith in America. I mean, Canada, right? That's just not happening. So, I love it when Christians start talking about this, believing something so much that they'd be willing to die for it. And yet, I can give you 3 or 4 places in the world where you can go and start sharing those beliefs. A one-way ticket is all you need. Just max out your credit card. It doesn't matter. You won't be here to pay the bill. You can go and die for it right now. Right now. Punch your ticket straight to heaven. But they don't. Because they don't really believe that at all. It's just a talking point. And what Christians want more than anything else, by and large, is to be martyrs without dying.
Right.
Everybody worships something.
And that's where we are going to leave this section of the podcast. So this is going to be claim number 3, and we will pick things up from there next time. Much more to say, and I probably won't be doing a lot of commenting until I'm done with this whole series. And if I get another space of time like this, maybe I can get that done this weekend. But for now, you know what to do. skepticsandseekers.squarespace.com. Log into your Discuss account. Discuss away. Send me an email at skepticsandseekers. Let's try that again. Send me an email at skepticsandseekers@gmail.com. Until next time, I will see you in the comments. And in the meantime, I'm out.